You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking to Kristin Webster about film editing, the noir genre, the movie Mulholland Drive, and much more. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and with me today is also host extraordinaire, Pete Charbonneau. Pete, how's it going today?
Oh, well, with an introduction like that, it can't go anything less than extraordinary, Bernie. Thank you.
Do have a guest that's here for the third time, Kristin Webster. Kristin, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me again.
You are an AFI editing fellow. You're a filmmaker. You're a professor. What do you teach? How do you teach it? A little bit about you.
So I teach a lot of different film courses. I teach digital editing, advanced digital editing, both video and sound, mostly video, but I do both. History of film, foreign cinema, aesthetic, American masters. I've taught screenwriting, but my passion definitely is teaching editors how to edit, learning professional editing software and the art of visual storytelling. I also freelance as an editor from time to time. I've worked on motorsports racing shows. I've done shorts, commercials, music videos, really anything I could get my hands on. But yeah, I love teaching. So I'm sort of backed away from full-time editing to become a professor. And I've been doing it since 2004. I started right after I got my master's. I was very young. I was 23 when I got my master's. I started teaching at the college level at 24. So I've been doing it for a while. But I also write, and, of course, everybody says this, but what I really want to do is direct. One day I will have the time and energy to make the feature I've been writing for like the past 12 years.
Is it fair to say when you watch a movie, is editing more in the foreground for you, where you are looking at it from, I don't want to say like an analytical viewpoint, but you're noticing this could have be done different. This does not help the narrative, or on the contrary, we had you on for Silence of the Lambs, and you were able to really kind of peel the layers about how the editing in that movie really helped with Jodie Foster's character's viewpoint and some of the things they were trying to accomplish there.
It's interesting. When I was younger, I was very analytical, watching movies and television shows, and I could find every little mistake or flub, and the editing always stood out to me. As I've gotten older, I've relaxed a lot with that. Now I can get swept away in the story and not even notice the editing. And it's interesting because my students, when I screen scenes for them in class, they will right away want to point things out to me. And I'm like, I didn't even notice that. But some things, obviously will always pop out at you. If they're done really, really well, I will notice them for the addition that they bring to the story. And if something's done very poorly, I'll see how it hinders the story. But I've tried to let that kind of fall to the wayside so I can enjoy the actual movie and not so much as a critic.
There'll be times where I'll watch the movie and I can't put away that critical perspective. Like I'm still looking at it like a problem that's there to be solved.
I think what works for me, at least on first viewing, is to try to take a movie in from a storytelling perspective and just, does the story work for me? Does it not work? And then if I have the luxury of going back and watching it again, or thinking about it, or having a discussion, after coming out of a theater or something like that, which are always, I always enjoy those, then I can start taking that deeper dive into it and start looking at some of the, what worked, what didn't work from a storytelling standpoint, from an editing standpoint, continuity standpoint, things like that. I find that I am able to peel back those layers afterwards, but for whatever reason, and there are times like, if I hear about a movie that has something that people are talking about from a visual perspective or direction or something like that, I go in and I want to be like, okay, let me figure out how they're putting this together. But I always just tend to fall back into, is this story working for me? And am I invested in the characters? Are the actors doing their job? And so I'm kind of getting lost into what I'm watching. And that just, for good or ill, that's just kind of my default when I go in and watch a movie. In terms of when you're teaching your advanced editing class, what does a final project look like for your students?
Oh, for an editing course, they are just editing. They're not shooting anything. They're not writing anything. So typically for the advanced editors, the hope is that they have a lengthy narrative project to edit, whether that means a short film in its entirety or a complex narrative scene in its entirety. They're going to have to do the picture editing and the sound editing for that project. And we build up to it over the semester. We start with smaller projects. We'll do a very short commercial, so something for 30 or 60 seconds, just to get them acclimated to the software. And then we'll do something like a short scene, could possibly be documentary or narrative. And then I usually have them do a trailer. And then we get to the longer format. If I have my way, they're doing an actual short film. It's in its entirety.
And is the idea that they all get the same film, or like, okay, so you're saying
they're doing the same thing.
You're saying their perspective as like a filmmaker, as an editor on top of what you've shown them, plus different editors that may have had influences on them to be like, right, well, this is Janice's film versus John's film. And you can see a little bit of Janice and John in their respective films.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only rules I give the students typically are the same, that I'm the producer. So I'm there to guide them, but I do it from the point of view of, I just want you to turn out the best work possible. I'm never going to ask them to change anything based on what like a real producer would do, but I'm there to guide them as we go so that their end product is the best that it can be for storytelling purposes. And I give them artistic freedom, but I do not give them carte blanche to reinvent the wheel. Because if you do that, you'll always get that student that's going to throw in like a duck sound where the character is making you cry. And they think it's funny, or they'll try to turn it into a trailer. They all want to turn it into a trailer because it's faster and you can just throw a song in and be flashy. It's like, no, you need to learn those nuances of reaction and overlapping dialogue and things like that. So I just have a couple rules and then let them take it from there.
From acclaimed director David Lynch.
Girl is missing. What do you want me to do?
The deeper you go,
I don't know what my name is. That money, you don't know where it came from.
the clearer you see.
I remember something.
The stranger it gets.
You're playing a dangerous game here.
Whoever you're hiding from, they know where you are. Mullholland Drive, rated R.
First time I saw it, I immediately put it in that neo-noir category with movies like Black Rain and Body Double. Blade Runner is in a way like a neo-noir movie too. Like it doesn't have to be Dressed to Kill or even something like Dark City, the Alex Proyas film that's completely underrated. But they all kind of share some of those elements. And I'm sure you'll be able to talk about this movie and all of the elements a lot better than I can. So we're talking about the 2001 David Lynch movie, Mulholland Drive.
So Mulholland Drive, I have a little special relationship to because when I was at AFI, every Wednesday we had a class called Master Seminar, and it was the best thing ever. I'm still welcome to it because I'm an alum. I would be part of the class, and what it was simply was a filmmaker, sometimes the actor, but typically the director, would bring their most recent work, screen it, and then we would have a Q&A after. And David Lynch, who started at AFI, he wasn't asked back for the second year, but he was an alum for the first year. He brought Mulholland Drive, and it was one of the first movies we saw in Master Seminar. So it set a tone for, wow, this is really fucking cool that we go to this conservatory. This is amazing. So I had seen David Lynch films before I got to AFI. My sister was a huge Twin Peaks fan and really just constantly would like me to watch it with her. And I did a few times and I fell in love with it, fell in love with the music mostly. And I had seen Blue Velvet a couple times, and Mulholland Drive was beautiful. I mean, I really loved the experience of watching it. It is neo-noir. So if the audience is a little unfamiliar with that term, neo-noir literally means new noir, and it comes from the movement of film noir in the United States, started in the 20s, but it went through the 50s. And it translates to dark film. And there are some rules about what would categorize a movie as being a film noir. Typically, they are set in Los Angeles. There's been a crime story element. There's usually a femme fatale. There is also a seediness to it where the people that are supposed to be the responsible individuals when it comes to crime are typically, what's the word I'm looking for? They're dirty cops or dirty prosecutors, things like that, where they're not on the up and up, we'll say. And they also then have those visual elements, the dark contrast, the shadows, a lot of silhouettes. And so David Lynch, a lot of his work looks very noirish. Mulholland Drive introduced the world to Naomi Watts. In a lot of ways, Justin Theroux, he'd been working, but he really kind of, I don't want to say exploded after that movie, but people knew who he was after that movie came out. And the movie itself is not a classic Hollywood movie. It's very ambiguous. There's a lot of confusion of reality and dream state. And when I saw it, I did really, really like it because of the experience of watching it. But I was highly confused. And I remember that after the movie ended, David Lynch came out, he sat on the stage, he smoked cigarette after cigarette after cigarette, which was unbelievable to the fellows sitting in the audience because one, this is Los Angeles where you couldn't smoke anywhere, even back in 2001 when I saw the movie on campus. But they let him because he was David Lynch. And he was a really great guy. He was very affable and talkative. He wasn't what I expected. I thought he would be foreboding and kind of quiet and dismissive, but he wasn't. He was really a nice guy. I think he had already found the meditation practice that he had started. So I think personally he started changing a lot. But one thing that stuck with me that I struggled with was the ambiguity of the storytelling and the fact that he had no problem with the ambiguity of the storytelling. And when people had asked, can you explain this? Or I was a little confused, he didn't explain anything. And he was happy about the confusion. Now, to be honest, we knew not to be too questioning of the guest filmmakers. We were not allowed to approach them and ask for autographs or photos. We couldn't ask about jobs. We couldn't ask, would you read my script? We were talked to before that seminars and series started. But we also knew that even if you hated a movie, you had to walk a fine line and be respectful because this is the AFI. These are, very successful filmmakers, maybe your boss one day, hopefully your boss one day. So you want to be careful of the lines you cross. So people, again, will ask some questions. And he, again, was not interested in a black or white ending or even explaining away the confusion of, well, was this real or was this fake?
I don't talk about things like that. You see the film and you feel and think your way through, just like any other film, and you come up with conclusions. It's beautiful to go into a new world, and that's what cinema gives us a chance to do.
The movie had a budget of about $15 million and it grossed $20 million. So it made some money, but not a lot by any standards in Hollywood. But it was very critically successful. He did earn a nomination for Best Director the next year at the Academy Awards. And that's somewhat discerning of a group. I mean, sometimes you hear the nominations and you're like, wait, they were nominated? But it was understandable. I don't think anyone questioned why he would get that nomination for that movie. People fell in love with Naomi Watts when that movie came out. They thought she was just the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was a slow burn for me. I did not love Naomi Watts at first. I didn't love that character. I was much more drawn to the other character in the movie. And I didn't necessarily become obsessed with it like some David Lynch fans have. But I did, though, wonder why it made such little money, because David Lynch has a cult following. Blue Velvet definitely kicked that into gear. And then Twin Peaks sealed that deal. People love him. Some interesting things I found out about the movie, and they kind of explained to me a little bit why it may not have been as successful. So apparently Mulholland Drive was meant to be a series, similar to how Twin Peaks was a series. And much of the movie was actually shot as a pilot in 1999. So about 2 years before it came out, they started shooting it as a pilot. And I was doing some research on, he really did intend to make it a series, but it was rejected by TV executives. So I think, when you have that much footage and it's great, you don't want that to fall onto the cutting room floor, so to speak. So they developed it into a movie. And I do have to wonder if the fact that it was meant to be told in terms of the story in a longer format, if the movie's story suffered because of that. And it's weird. I mean, I hate to use that term because it's so general, but it's a little unusual. It's a little odd. And the American public, and I talked about this a lot the last time I was on the show, I think the American public, particularly with commercial filmmaking, they want a traditional story structure. They want that arc. Even if they don't know what it is, even if they can't describe story structure or the arc, they know what they want. And I don't think this movie gives that to you. I don't think it gave it to the audience. And I think that by word of mouth or reviews, it probably kept a lot of people out of the theaters, even worldwide. I know that at one point after the movie came out, there were a group of very famous critics, about 6 critics that were asked to review the movie. And some of the critics, I think Ebert had said it was what it was. He didn't mind the ambiguity. Maybe it is just take it at face value.
The number 5 movie on my list is Mulholland Drive by David Lynch. I haven't been a fan of many of his films, but this one fascinated me from beginning to end. It takes place in a Hollywood that is part Tinseltown, part film noir, and all dream, and stars Laura Elena Herring and Naomi Watts as 2 women, or are they really just 1 woman, involved in a murder mystery, or is it a murder, or is it a mystery? Even if you can't figure out a single thing, the film is compulsively watchable with its images of eroticism, mystery, Nancy Drew-style adventure, bizarre auditions, and creepy theatrical performances. Are those 2 heroines real or a figment of the imagination of a third person? Are they aspects of the same personality? Mulholland Drive leads us into a mesmerizing labyrinth, and afterwards, it teases us with possible interpretations.
Well, I've got it at number 3 on my list, so I obviously loved it. And I recently went back and watched it again after reading, and I don't always like to do this, read all these analyses on the internet and people having different theories. Yeah. But this time, I have to say, it really enriched my experience, and I enjoyed it even more the second time, even thinking about the various theories.
The TV critic from the LA Times attacked the nation's film critics for liking this film and said it made no sense at all. It was just a TV pilot that was cobbled together, and we all fell for it, and the emperor has no clothes. Actually, I'm telling you, I have given thumbs down to one David Lynch movie after another, and as I watched this film, I was completely fascinated by it and drawn into it and entertained by it and absorbed by it from beginning to end. I don't care what its source was, whether it was made for TV or whether it was made for David Lynch's home movies, it worked.
But other critics were a little disappointed in the way I was, where I didn't walk away completely satisfied. And I don't like when something has to be explained to me after the fact, because that's not what a movie's about. A movie is about experiencing it. Now, I will say that kind of bouncing off what Pete just said about the movie-going experience and talking about movies, I love to sit and talk about movies. I love to theorize and critique and analyze after the fact. But I want to watch a movie once just as a moviegoer and experience it, take it in. It's what I tell my students to do when we do in-class critiques. We watch everything twice. Watch it once and don't write any notes. Just sit there and take it in, and then we'll watch it again. I'll turn the lights up a little bit so you can take notes and we can really get into analyzing what we just watched. I don't want something to be explained to me after the fact, because I think you missed the boat then completely on the story. If later you have to, well, it was this, or we really meant this, because if I don't understand that when I'm watching a movie, it didn't succeed. And I remind my students that all the time while we do critiques, I don't let them talk when people are critiquing their work. I don't let them preface their work. That was a big lesson I learned in grad school, because one, it's not a good idea to start something by, well, it's really bad because I didn't have enough time, or the sound's going to sound bad because. Don't even tell people that, because they may not notice it, but now they're definitely going to. But I don't let my students defend their work either, because it's important to hear what people have to say. And if one person doesn't understand something, even if you explain it now, I would say at least 10% of your audience probably didn't understand it. And I think, honestly, circling back, that's what happened with Mulholland Drive, that the ambiguity, it just, I think, hurt their chances of bringing more and more people into the theater. David Lynch does not grab an audience in terms of numbers like Steven Spielberg used to. So I think a lot of the audience for his movies were reviews and word of mouth. But I think the reviews of word of mouth drove people away.
So when I saw this movie, I didn't see it. I knew it was a David Lynch film, but I was watching it because I'm a fan of noir films. And when I think of noir films, and this is kind of like what you were talking about with the beginning of that movement, I think of watching like Double Indemnity or The Big Sleep or Maltese Falcon with my dad. Those are the templates. And then you get the neo-noir movies like Chinatown and LA Confidential, right? Drive, absolutely. Like those are the movies that took Double Indemnity, like the femme fatale, and the idea, like you said, of like the corrupted official or policeman, you know, and then kind of now kind of start playing around with it. Even like Christopher Nolan in Memento, which is feels a little noir, but it has this extra thing on top of it that kind of changes it, right? I'm wondering if with something like Mulholland Drive, that's David Lynch's signature, is the ambiguity. Twin Peaks, Lost Highway. He's looking at a film like Double Indemnity. He's like, I see all the pieces, and I know you as a moviegoer know this is when this is supposed to happen. You know, and this is not to make an excuse for him, right? Because again, if you can't walk away from the movie understanding what the story was, then you could argue that the storyteller, something happened. There was a failure along the way, right? Like there's an ambiguity in the sense that you don't know if a certain plot element was resolved. You know, like, did they really get away with it? Was that all, like you said, was that reality? Or even in thinking about Christopher Nolan, Inception, the top is still spinning, but we don't need to know what the end of that is because we understand that there's closure in that character in some way or another, right?
Right.
But in Mulholland Drive, some of that ambiguity from the time that I saw it, it was more frustrating to me than it was artistic, where I'm like, this isn't his stamp. This is just kind of hard to watch. And I don't fully get what's happening here.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you can have ambiguity, and it could be used as a device to generate discussion after, you know, especially if it's happening at the end of a film, like you mentioned with Inception, where people can talk about it and can debate, like, is the top going to stop spinning or is it not, you know, and that's all well and good because it's open to interpretation. And it sounds like that's kind of what David Lynch was going for with this, from what you were describing, Chris, and, you know, and not really answering those questions at the end of the filming is like, well, I'm leaving this open to interpretation. So however you want to take it, that is the right answer, which I think from an artistic standpoint is great. And it makes a lot of sense. But again, going back, like when you're talking about the quote, American movie-going populace, there's this, you know, there's a lot of people that, like you said, they want that story structure. And they kind of want to be, not literally, but kind of handheld through a movie to be like, here's how we go and here's where we get it. Because they just, you know, they just want the escape for an hour and a half. And then they want to come out and be like, that was a really good movie. Okay, let's go get some dinner. Where are we going? Applebee's? Sounds great. And and there's, you know, that's perfectly fine because that's what they want. And that's what they want to get out of that experience. You know, there's those of us that want maybe a little bit of a different experience. So, you know, it's all good, but it sounds like with this, at least in terms of getting that larger audience, he was kind of coming up against like a pretty steep hill to try and climb to, you know, get that audience to look past the ambiguity. And I think it's also a long film too. It's like 146 minutes. So if you're a person that's investing into that time that maybe is not necessarily a David Lynch fan, that's going to be like, I'm all in, the longer, the better. Great.
Right.
And you've got this ambiguity, you've got this, you're making people really have to think about it and be confused and try to sort what's going on. And to do that for that long of a time, I think, again, word of mouth might have just been like, don't waste your time on this because you're going to be confused and frustrated and do something else.
Yeah.
Mulholland Drive has like the checklist, like you mentioned, you know, a lot of these films happen to be in LA. So a lot of the visuals in Mulholland Drive have that, like, what is it, the LA basin where you can see drop down in like the valley. You can see the very expensive homes.
I think the movie's about
two things. I think it's about sort of a fantasy of a woman who has an idea of what Hollywood is and what she's sort of going to become, and then it's a love story on top of it.
This is the girl.
He actually has one of the healthiest attitudes about LA and Hollywood than anyone I've ever known. But having said that, this is a guy who loves LA as much as he does, but he doesn't really leave his house much.
I'm so lucky to find both these girls and Justin Theroux and the whole cast. You try to get the right person for the part. Everyone who is known was at one point unknown. So I think these particular, actors have a chance to become known. They've got the stuff.
It has in Naomi Watts the character that comes from the Midwest, and thinking about like all those movies. Is it Veronica Lake? The character that Kim Basinger plays in LA Confidential. She came from like a Kansas, dyed her hair blonde, but came in on like the Greyhound, and then found her way into feature films. That's the character that Naomi Watts plays, like that wholesome Midwestern blonde. Oh yeah, she's going to be the young ingenue that's going to end up in film. So there's all these things in like the noir checklist that are there. And maybe for better or for worse, that's where really good filmmakers, like I would think like Shutter Island, like that's a movie that also had a lot of noir dripping out of it, but for me was unsuccessful. But you could tell that, of course, Scorsese has watched all of these films and he's like, yeah, I know the things that I'm supposed to set up. Like here's the main protagonist who has a PTSD or a trauma or something in the past that's going to haunt him in the present day. It's like, oh yeah, that's there. But there's something about Shutter Island that, Pete, kind of what you were talking about with the movie going public, that's closer to like a 4-quadrant film where, the 60-year-old that watches like MeTV will totally get this because it feels like that kind of old school movie. But someone who's younger will understand the mystery and, in casting Leonardo DiCaprio. Mulholland Drive, I mean, again, there's no one really big attached to it. So everything about it is mood and David Lynch. And if both of those don't work, even if you have good performances and good mood, you still need David Lynch to kind of to stick the landing and say, here's all of these pieces together, everything you expect to happen in a noir, but with his sensibilities attached to it.
And I think, you've got a couple of things that are kind of like dovetailing might not be the right word, but it's kind of like honing in on something where noir is a genre that I absolutely love, but it has a limited audience and a limited range. And then you're basically getting David Lynch's take on a neo-noir or noir movie. So, you're narrowing that scope of people that are going to be super excited to see something like this. But if you don't have the cast that's bringing in the people, like the big name star, or something else that's kind of like grabbing the public's attention, you're almost kind of setting yourself up to be almost like a niche film that can maybe score that cult status. And, and I think from talking to people that love Mulholland Drive, like they are very passionately pro Mulholland Drive and, and they will talk about it for hours or for days.
Yes.
And that's great because there's just that intensity there. But, again, and that intensity is confined to a smaller group than that wider audience appeal.
So I'm wondering, Kristin, from the time that you saw him in that class, right? Had you revisited the movie?
I have. Actually, the next year, I watched it again with a director who I was working with on a thesis film, and she's an incredible director. She's very successful now. Her name is Eva Hussan. She just had a film that was at Fan2Fan Festival called Mothering Sunday. So a little shout out to Eva. She's an unbelievable woman and filmmaker. I'm so happy for her and proud of her success. But we are working together, and she was one of those people that left an imprint on me with the way she worked as a director. She trusted me as an editor. She let me work and then would come and watch our film and give me notes, but not crowd me. And one of the days we were working together, she kind of stopped and was like, let's go to my apartment and watch Mulholland Drive. And we watched it together, and it was really just about her interpretations and talking to me about her inspiration she was pulling from the movie and what she saw in our movie that I could draw off of. And it did really opened my eyes to other things about the movie. I mean, I've visited it again over the years a couple times. Just it's beautiful. I mean, it's a visually remarkable piece of art. And I really, as I've gotten older, I've fallen in love with the symbols in the movie. If you go back and watch the movie, the symbols are unbelievable. And I almost have to forgive him for the problems I had with the movie, because I have fallen for these amazing, like, little secrets, I guess, that he puts in his work. And specifically, the couple that I loved in the movie are the use of curtains and the use of flowers. Because my favorite scene in the movie is like the saddest scene, where the two women are sitting in the theater and that opera singer is singing Roy Orbison. Well, I don't know if Roy Orbison wrote the song, but Crying. It's Roy Orbison made the song famous. I'm not sure if he wrote it, but it's full, I believe, in either Spanish or Italian. I think it's Spanish. I could be wrong. It might be Italian, but it's beautiful. And what's really beautiful is the woman sings until she collapses. But the emotion coming out of her and the emotion coming out of the two women is remarkable. But what I found in that scene was that the singer is in front of these red curtains, and you see those red curtains throughout the movie a few other times. And I think that the whole idea of what is a curtain is something you hide behind. I mean, that's why we have them. And they also block out the light. And I think there's a lot of that in the story. There's a lot of hiding behind things and also blocking out the light. I mean, that movie is a little dark. I mean, it's dark. It's not a little dark. It is dark. And there is a tone of, yes, Naomi Watts's character is a bright-eyed young woman, but she quickly sees the cynicism in Hollywood and what it's really about. And it's going to, it's hard to fight that darkening force, even if you're the most positive person.
Mulholland Drive. That's where I was going.
David loves Los Angeles and Hollywood. I don't necessarily think this is his take on it. I think this is his take of a sort of a weak-minded person's take on Hollywood. Many of the things on the surface exist, the directors, producers, studio heads, these kinds of things. But they all exist in this sort of demented, non-real way. Like the studio head is this sort of bizarre, man who lives underneath with curtains and, behind glass with a little earpiece and those kinds of things, which are really sort of how the studio system exists in your subconscious, that they have this incredible power to shut things down, turn things on, and manipulate people and sort of wreck and change their lives.
Is that something you might agree with?
Sure.
And I also love, there are a lot of flowers in the movie, but I read an amazing essay years ago about the blue rose, how they're not found naturally in nature. The theorist was talking about how that's sort of a self-evident symbol that nothing really in the movie is found in nature. Everything is so fantastical and made up. And that kind of makes you re-evaluate, if you will, the whole movie too. So it's not in my top 10 of favorite films, but I can love it for what it offers to the world in terms of a piece of cinematic art. But yeah, the more I've watched it, I've watched it for other things rather than the story.
The more you watch it, the more you take away more from it.
And I think that actually then raises a question, which would be something interesting to talk about maybe at a different time. But is a movie successful if you have to watch it multiple times to appreciate it?
People have been getting off the bus for years and years. And I say it's like going to Las Vegas. Everybody goes there thinking they got a chance to win. And they all do have a chance to win. But 99% of them come back with less than they went in with.
And he's also, I think, very attached to the old Hollywood mythology, meaning, like all the movies that we saw growing up, especially for him in the 50s. And I think that's how he sees it, perhaps through rose-colored glasses. But there's a few things that he sends up, and I don't think it's the way he sees it, but, obviously it's done with a lot of irony, and it makes it fun.